Want to start a podcast, or are you already a podcast host? What would you say if I told you that you can get paid up to $31 per guest you interview, and I can help you book those guests? If you want to start making more money with your podcast right now and interview great guests who your listeners will love, it's not too good to be true. It's Podmatch. If you use my Podmatch link in the show notes right now, Podmatch will pay you up to $31 per interview. Yes, up to $31 per interview. I did not stutter. If you want to make more money from your podcast while expanding your reach and getting more listeners, simply click our Podmatch link in the show notes right now to check out this really cool opportunity. Most podcasters struggle to say what they do and what their podcast is about in a compelling and clear way that gets attention and gets more listeners. Which is why in this episode, I'm going to share with you a podcast messaging structure that works every single time. It's going to be a fill in the blank. You can listen to it. You can take out what I say and insert what you do and how it applies to you, so you can instantly have a message that works well and people respond to. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to go grab the free Speak Your Listener's Language PDF. It's a simple 3-page PDF that's going to show you 7 super simple keys to easily crafting a powerful brand message for your podcast that will make your podcast more appealing to more of the right people so your show will grow. So go grab it right now. It's totally free. Just click the link in the show notes that says Speak Your Listener's Language right now. So as I've said before, a lot of people start podcasts and it's on a particular topic, but they don't know how to say what they do in a way that's compelling and gets them noticed and stand out from the other millions of podcasts in this bloody red ocean of a bunch of things that look and sound the same. And so they don't know how to distinguish themselves and be distinct and different and noticeable using words, because that's what makes the difference. The words you use is what will be the difference between either the success or failure, the make or break of your podcast. And so it's really frustrating if you're trying to go out there and share your information, grow your podcast, but you blend in so much with everybody else that listeners searching for what you give them that they want, they just can't find you. And that's frustrating, especially with all the time and effort and energy and money and production, all that effort put in, and then it's sort of like 1 or 2 people find it, or nobody's listening to it at all. Well, again, in this podcast episode, I'm going to teach you a very simple podcast messaging structure that's going to work every single time for you. So stick around. And let me ask you this really quick, fellow podcaster. Are you looking for an easy way to record your podcast episodes in world-class high quality, edit them in a flash, and make them live without all the technical headaches and confusion? If so, then you're in luck. Riverside FM is the premier podcast recording software that allows you to produce the same high-quality podcasts as other world-famous podcasters your listeners are already enjoying. Look, level up your podcast right now, even if you're brand new, you're not a techie, maybe you don't have a lot of time, so you can attract more listeners to your podcast consistently. This thing has AI software built into it that can cut clips from your podcast and do in 5 seconds what it would take you 5 hours to do, so you can share those to social media and get more exposure and grow your following. So look, simply click the Riverside FM link in the show notes to grow your podcast to the next level, starting right now. This podcast messaging structure works every single time if you will do it. Okay, this is simple, and here's what it is. These are 2 questions your podcast branding must answer for new or returning listeners. For anybody listening to your podcast, you need to answer these 2 questions in their minds. 1, what problem do I solve? And 2, how do I solve it? So think about this. Think about if I were to say this sort of little narrative. Are you tired of blank? Insert the problem. Sick of feeling stuck with? Insert the problem or the enemy that your listeners are facing. Nobody wants to deal with? Insert problem. Forever. We solve your problem this way so you can blank, and you just insert the desired outcome. So again, are you tired of blank? This is the enemy, the problem. Are you sick of feeling stuck with? Insert the enemy or problem. Nobody wants to deal with the enemy or problem. Inserted. Nobody wants to deal with that forever. We solve your problem this way so you can blank, get the desired outcome. So I kind of pounded in a few times, 2 or 3 times, the enemy that keeps getting in their way. That's in the narrative of your podcast. That is the narrative in their minds, which is why they're listening to your podcast, okay? And then I said, well, we solve it in this unique way and help you get this outcome you want. So here's a very practical example of this podcast, the Podgasm Marketing Podcast. Are you tired of having a podcast that isn't growing? Sick of putting in all that time and effort and nobody hears it? Nobody wants to put tons of time and money into a podcast nobody will end up listening to. We solve this problem by clarifying your podcast brand message so more people will listen. And if you do this, and if you listen to our podcast, you're going to get more listeners. Or we could say, and if you do this, and if you listen to our podcast, you're going to learn how to clarify your podcast's brand message so more listeners will show up and subscribe more often. So this is very simple to do. You just fill in the blanks here. So again, these two questions you must answer, these branding questions you must answer in the minds of your listeners are: one, what problem do I solve? And two, how do I solve it? We solve a messaging problem on this podcast. And how do we do it? By teaching you how to say what you do in a way that's clear, compelling, and gets noticed so people will click on your podcast and listen to it. So how does this apply to you? How does this apply to your podcast? How could you fill in this fill in the blank statement for your listeners? If you are talking to them, maybe it's like an ad. Are you tired of blank? The problem. Are you sick of feeling stuck with blank? The problem. Nobody wants to deal with blank. The problem. Forever. We solve your problem, or we help you, or this podcast helps you in this particular way so you can blank and insert whatever desired outcome your ideal listeners are trying to get out of your podcast. This is why it's so important to have a very specific, niched, clear idea of who exactly your listener is, because then you can speak their language. If you're too vague, it won't work. And that's one huge key to growing your podcast. And look, if this has been helpful for you and you know another podcaster this episode can help, please share it with them. It takes 3 seconds. Click that share button, send it to them so I can help them in the same way that I'm trying to help you today. Do you struggle to write compelling and effective brand messaging that gets your podcast noticed? Do you want more people to listen to your podcast, but you struggle to talk about it in a way that grabs their attention and keeps it? If your podcast marketing messaging is not up to par, you are losing listeners. But maybe you don't know anything about copywriting and writing marketing messaging and such. Fortunately for you, I've been doing it for over 17 years. Do you want me to write your podcast marketing messaging for you in a clear, powerful, and compelling way that grabs your ideal listeners' attention and makes them want to listen to your podcast over and over again? Each month, I take on a small, limited number of clients and rewrite their podcast marketing messaging for them. Yes, I do all the hard work for you, and you just get to enjoy the benefits of it without any of the headaches when I'm done. If you want me to craft clear, distinct, and compelling marketing messaging that grows your podcast for you so you can attract more listeners consistently, send me an email right now at podgasmshow@gmail.com. There's a link in the show notes. And put the word consult in the subject line to check my availability.